May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke audio presentation of Life in Bali. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Doga Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Today's guest on Life in Bali, our once-a-week respite from all that Zen nonsense, is Raymond Rausch. Raymond has been here, good Lord, he's been here, around 4 decades. And he was in India some of that time, but mainly he's been here. And anyway, you'll hear about it. And he's an artist, a jeweler, and a musician. He's when I first met him, he was playing tabla with Chris Patra at Ubud. And, we did a podcast with Chris Patra and his mother, Kim Patra, a very musical family. Anyway, I got to talking with Raymond. He was very interesting. And incidentally, we were sitting, near the ocean outside Ubud, where we eat is just outdoors. And it's right by the beach. There's a little wall going down to the beach that's, 4 feet or 5 feet. And so it's a pretty safe place to be, I think. Anyway, so I met him there and I said, hey, why don't you do a podcast? And so he said, all right. So, I guess we could just go right into it. I think I'll make a comment about the virus here, the COVID-19 virus. Yeah, I've talked about how everybody here wears a mask and there's no opposition to it, and how we have 1/8 the severity of the virus that they have in America. People here are cooperative and this and that. Well, we learn in this podcast that a musician in the rather radical local band Superman is Dead was just sentenced to 1 year in jail for having disparaged the medical community and leading a demonstration against masks. So, I didn't know there was anything like that happening here. It's not on any big scale or anything. He was just, a contrarian there. And this isn't a good place to do that sort of thing. Why don't we give Raymond a call and we'll just get going with it, all right?
Hello, sir. What can I do for you?
Hi, Raymond. This is David Chadwick.
Are you okay?
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm always good.
Good.
$1 million.
Yeah. Well, listen, tape's rolling. Tell us what you're up to these days.
Well, right now, I locked myself in my home and I'm staying home while the rain is stripping away outside. We just had a little rainstorm here. And Yeah, I'm laying back. I'm still recovering from last night. We did a little session at a local pub here in Ubud,
Ah,
trying
ah,
out some new things which I just learned.
hmm.
And so to see my memory still functions, which is always, with growing age and having more and more stuff stuck into your memory, it's always a challenge.
Ah, you're a youngster. You're what, 64?
Yep, that's
Yeah.
where I'm at. Which is still young, but memory is slowly filling up because I'm absorbing so many things, It's just amazing
Yeah.
what's there to be learned and absorbed, and I'm putting myself on a regimen trying to learn new things on a daily basis to keep that brain muscle working.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So, what did you learn last night or do last night that was sort of new or you had to remember or what?
Well, I've been struggling 5 bongo beats for the bongo drum,
Yeah.
which go actually, they are not the traditional kind of a thing. It's like for electronic dance music to accompany electronic dance music like a DJ.
Hmm.
So they're very simple patterns, but I found that simple patterns are the most challenging things to learn. And it's with everything like that in my life, that whenever it's a kind of complicated, I can pick it up immediately and my memory stores it. But if it's simple,
Hmm.
then for whatever reason, it's very difficult to remember because it's similar to other things and you don't take it as serious, you know,
Uh-huh.
brain-wise to actually learn it. You go like, oh yeah, that's easy, I can do that. And you go like, yeah, well, but you can't remember it. And then I struggled for 3 days to learn those 5 little patterns.
Uh-huh.
And finally, I managed to recall them while I was with other musicians,
Hmm.
and they were so unbelievably simple that they were really difficult to learn.
Hmm.
And I always tell that because I teach people Afro-Cuban drumming. I always tell my students that, believe it or not, the most simple things are always the most difficult.
Ah, that's very interesting. Now you're I think of you as a painter, an artist, a visual artist, a sculptor, that sort of thing, right?
Well, right now I'm focused on jewelry and music. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I've been basically doing to, to make a name with and to have a little following who supports me
Yeah.
and also to have set up my gigs. So I'm known for, making very, very beautiful classic jewelry which fits to the Bali market, but which also fits into a category of being unique, being arty, and something you want to buy when you're in Bali. Because I had to adapt to things so I can make a living. It's all about making a living.
Uh,
Okay, it's not about
mhm.
getting rich. It's about making a living and being able to get away living in Bali.
Yeah. 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 What materials are you using in your jewelry?
Okay, right now my company is called Pebbles and Pearls, and
Wait, would you spell that or I didn't quite get it?
pebbles, like a pebble you find on the beach,
Oh, okay. Pebble.
and pearls. And so I,
Mm-hmm.
I chose that name because what I do is I work as a magician working the lapidary wheel,
Yeah.
which means I basically find a stone which looks interesting, and I try to keep the interesting part of it, but polish up some of the uninteresting features.
Uh-huh.
So, and so it's a combination of nature and man touched. So that is the lapidary part. And then in order to upgrade it and to get it into a shape where people actually charge money, um, then I put it into precious metals like gold or silver. But I have to say, there's always a twist. The idea is to give it the twist so things move. They have to be alive because when they're alive, then they're outstandingly beautiful and people notice them and people want to buy them and
Yeah.
possess them.
Now, if we were in Ubud, and we've talked about, we like to get out like once a month. We've talked about going up there. How could we see your jewelry?
Well, right now the shops are closed, and in Ubud, where I display, in Ubud at the moment I have two shops, but in my home, in my studio, I have, which is functions as my workshop, where I'm at the moment while we do this podcast.
Yeah.
Right here I have a small display where I look at the pieces and I change them around, and that's just for walk-ins, for whenever somebody needs a present or whatever.
Yeah. 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 Huh. Well, that sounds really interesting. Now, how long have you been? When did you first come to Bali?
I came to Bali the very first time in in 1978, but I visited for a short time, and and I and I decided not to stay here
Uh huh.
at that time. And then, but I loved it a lot, and I came back in '82, and that's when I decided to stay.
And you were in what? India in between?
Yeah, we were out of India. We were the guys who went overland from Europe in the
Mm.
'70s, and there were a whole bunch of us, basically from Middle Europe, like Denmark and Germany, and the whole civilized, well-doing countries back in the '70s.
Hmm.
We were
Hmm.
the dropouts, the ones who were searching for more than just having a well-paid job and a family, who
Yeah.
actually wanted to explore the world. We were interested in that. Plus, we were rebels. We didn't want you to work all the time. We
Yeah.
wanted you to enjoy life. We didn't want you to have a kid with 20 yet and a family and a well-paid job to go to every day. We wanted to be out there and meet other fellows and meet other cultures and explore the world. And back then, it wasn't that easy to travel. So we couldn't always afford to go on a plane. So we decided to go overland, and we had this old truck, which we transformed into a thing, and we took it overland all the way from Copenhagen, Denmark, from Christiania,
Hmm.
where I lived as a dropout, and we drove the thing all the way to India. Hello?
Aha, we're back.
All
Good.
right.
Oh, wow.
What happened? It just flashed. I thought it was me, but it wasn't me. It must have been your side.
No.
Because I had a call
Well,
right after that. I had a call from Zanzibar. Check this out. My friend
wow.
my friend called me from Zanzibar. Do you know Kotir? Kotir?
Yes. Yes.
Kotir I had on the phone this morning also from Maui.
Yeah, that's great.
Kotir is
That's
very
great.
close with me. Kotir and me, we are old buddies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really.
Oh, really?
We go
Wow.
we
Yeah, we know him
we
pretty well.
we go back to the Ubud days when he was still living in Ubud. I know him from Bali.
Ah, ah. He lived in Yelapa in Mexico,
Uh-huh.
and I've been there, and there was no road to
Uh-huh.
Yelapa, a very small place. I think he told me he lived there 9 years.
Oh, I imagine because he's been all over the planet and he's a real trooper.
Oh, yeah, yeah. He's in Hawaii now, still, right?
He's in Maui and he's kind of in a lockdown thing. He went there because he's turning 77 this year, and
Yeah.
he was, because of his medical condition, he's fine, but he just wants to be a little closer to where the good medical service is. But he found out the hard way that you're not necessarily safer in America, and that in order to access all those services, you need to have a private insurance, which sets you back $1,000 a month now.
Yeah, we pay about $105 a month each for Medicare B, and we cannot use it unless we are living in the United States. So we've paid thousands of dollars for that because
You don't
we
want,
want to be able to use
Yeah.
it. It's just insurance. If something happens and we're in the States or we go back,
yeah,
that makes a big difference.
of course it does.
Okay. Now, anyway, what happened to me was a technical problem. I do not want to waste your time explaining it. I
Don't
hope
worry about
doesn't
it.
happen
There's,
again. Yeah.
I don't believe in wasting time, except that I'm using my time, so there is no wasting time because
No, I agree.
I'm using
I
it.
agree. I agree. Well, I have a wonderful tech guy, and I called him up, and we have a program where he gets on my computer, TeamViewer, and it was a very difficult problem to solve, and he got it. And I love to watch what he's doing. He gets into the operational files of the computer, and he doesn't understand programs. Like if I ask him a question, how do I do something in Photoshop? He doesn't know, but he knows. He's like a mechanic who can't drive a car.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, but he's great. Anyway, so I think the last thing I asked you was, where are you from in Germany?
Okay, was referring to our trips to India. Well, I'm from the northern part of Bavaria, and my story was that I should tell the stories to make it more
Yeah.
understandable. Otherwise, we'll go like, well, before that and before that, blah blah blah. Well, my story
Yeah.
was that I was raised with my grandmother, and I went to elementary school at my grandmother's place, which was close to Würzburg. And then
Yeah.
I got, because my mom was busy. My mom, by the way, used to work as a librarian at a library for the GIs in Würzburg. And so I was raised with my grandmother. And then when I became 10 years old, I was transferred into a boarding school, into a kind of privileged boarding school, which was a musical boarding school. And I stayed there until I was 14, and then I ran away from the boarding school. And I ended up going up to Denmark. And because I saw a documentary on Christiania, on the occupied part of Copenhagen, where, people who had a different understanding of life took over old army barracks and made a free state in the midst of Copenhagen. And Christiania still exists.
Yeah.
So that was my education, kind of. And I lived up there, and from there we did our first trip to India. So now we are back on the trip to India, okay?
Yeah.
So we took this old Hanomag truck. Hanomag is a German brand. And there was nothing on the back, and we built a wooden house on it. And we managed to drive that thing through Greece with a stopover in Greece where we picked oranges and made some money and picked olives. We managed to bring that truck all the way overland to India, and then on to Nepal, where we sold the truck, and then we split up. And that was my first trip going to India.
What countries did you go through from Greece?
Okay, we went from Greece to Turkey, from Turkey to Iran. From Iran, we went straight into Afghanistan. And the funny thing was, when we went there, in Iran, it was still the Shah in power. Same in Afghanistan, it was just before the Russians moved into Afghanistan. And okay, then on to Pakistan over the Khyber Pass. And then we went straight into from Lahore straight into Amritsar, India, and then, and so on. And some of the group went up to Manali, and the other group went with the truck over to Nepal, where we sold the truck, because in India you couldn't sell the truck. It was written in the truck driver's responsible passport that he had to leave with the truck India again.
Yeah.
And so the only way to sell a truck was up in Nepal. So that's what we did. We sold it in Nepal, and but there's a story about the wooden house. The wooden house, actually, before we went to Nepal, we went up to Manali, and the wooden house was swapped for a couple of keys of black charas, which was...
What's that? What's that?
Well, I'm not supposed to say that on the podcast because we're in Indonesia.
Come on.
Okay. Anyhow, charas, for anybody who understands, you can look it up. You can Google it. And it was swapped for that, which was then sent back, and then that money was split up in between us. And then we went our own ways. I went down south to see Sai Baba, and then I hitchhiked overland from down south up to Pune. And that was what I already explained to you, that long trip I had there where I took little O-balls, and I ended up in Pushkar, and I was sick, and I had to do antibiotics for 5 days to get over the stuffly infection I had in my blood. So, and then on the way I met Australians who told me about Indonesia. And I was vegetarian back then. I was madly in love with fruits and any kind of tropical fruits, which was new to me, being a German. And like papayas and pineapples and things like that. And I heard how cheap they were in Indonesia and how big they were and how delicious. And I met Australians down in the south of India when I did a trip down to Pondicherry to see the village of Auroville, because they built a village there where they tried to break out and build a new age village, a new age community. And I went to see that, and there I met some Australians who told me about Indonesia, and they turned me on to come to Indonesia. But before I went to Indonesia, I went back to Europe again, and that's why because of the time already passed in between India and Nepal, on my way back, all of a sudden, Afghanistan was occupied by the Russians, and Iran all of a sudden had Khomeini in power. So,
really?
And that was a whole different ball game. And so on the way back, I managed to get back in one piece, and then I flew back out from Copenhagen. That was my first trip actually flying to Indonesia. I flew, there was a trip in between where I went to India with my grandmother, but that's a different story. Anyway, let's just go into Indonesia now. My first trip to Indonesia was via Singapore, where I had dreadlocks back then, like a Rasta man, and long hair, and there was a thing back then that you had to cut your hair as a foreigner right at the border, or you would only get 2 days, and you had to hide your hair and tie it back.
Yeah.
And so I decided not to cut my hair, so they gave me a stamp for only 2 days. 2 days wasn't enough. Then I went over to Johor Bahru, over the bridge into Malaysia, thinking that if I would tie it really nicely back and hide it on their hat, they wouldn't recognize it, but they did. And so they gave me another time, so only 2 days. And then I said, this is it, and I flew out into Jakarta. And my mission back then was to figure out how to make tempeh. And that was because when I went back to Europe again, I met up with a friend who started a tempeh factory up in Copenhagen to produce tempeh, Indonesian soya product. and he wanted me to study and get him what's called the tempeh starter, which is a spore from the hibiscus plant, which you mix together with the pre-cooked soya beans, which then ferments the soya beans into tempeh. And so I studied and took photos and accumulated a couple of kilos of tempeh starter and sent it back from Jakarta. I was already in Jakarta back then, where I did that whole study thing, and then I ended up in Bali. Okay, so that's more or less a rough out sketch of my trip to Bali.
Yeah, wow. That's far. What do you mean you did a study thing in Yogyakarta?
Well, I came to Georgia and I saw tempeh being sold all over the markets, and I followed the trace of where the tempeh is being produced. And
I see.
and I went to the local tempeh factories, to different ones, to study how they traditionally make tempeh. And back then it was still very primitive. They were still cooking the soya beans on wood fire in big kettles, and it was rather, in black environments from the black smoke of the wood.
Yeah.
And it was still very, very old style, let's say. But it worked, and they taught me how to make tempeh, and which back then was not wrapped in plastic. It was wrapped in banana leaves.
Right.
And the banana leaves also did a special thing to the curation of the tempeh. People have found out that tempeh is a great substitute for meat. Why? Because it has B vitamin 12 in it. Now, if you have tempeh wrapped in plastic, it only has 1/10 of the B vitamin 12 content compared to the tempeh wrapped in banana leaf. The banana leaf gives a reaction and creates B vitamin 12 for whatever reason. That's what they found out. And and that was found out by one of the food professors, Harmuko or whatever his name was. He was also featured at the food festival as a speaker here. I think he already passed away though. From Janet Chanev here in Ubud. We had the Ubud Festival and Writers Festival, and she brought him over twice to talk about tempeh. He was like the Indonesian ambassador of tempeh, working for the WHO, and actually, more or less advertising tempeh as a superfood. So,
wow.
And that was why it was so interesting for us. We had the feeling that tempeh would be something special. Plus, we were vegetarian, and we were reading about what we need to have a balanced diet. And I went even stricter, because back then it wasn't vegan or raw food as it is now. Back then we had macrobiotics. That was the big thing. That was the big thing in the 60s, in the 70s. And it was basically advertised from a Japanese couple called Michio and Evelyn Kushi. Kushi was the name, sorry. Out of Japan, who created East-West centers. They started in Boston, and then they created those East-West centers all over the planet and spread the idea of macrobiotic living. And of course, we went through that. And there, of course, tempeh played a very, very big role in order to balance your food and in order to be still healthy while not eating meat. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, now go on. Questions? For I'm out of
Yeah,
breath.
oh, that's great. That's great. Oh, yeah, I have to bite my tongue not to comment on some of these things because some of it I'm familiar with. But that's great. So, So then that was about 82 when you moved back here. You were just here briefly in 78.
In 78, I was here briefly. In 78, I actually did what you call a little electronic run. Okay? I did a little
Uh,
electronic run to Singapore and brought back electronics and made a little money like that.
oh,
Okay? That was
I see.
that was the first time, and there it didn't matter about the short time being there. But then I went back to Singapore, and then I went back on to Indonesia,
Yeah.
and that was actually in 78. And then I went back to India again, and I went back to Europe again. I did a couple of overland trips. I did one trip also with my grandmother, who was back then 72 years old. My grandmother became my travel companion. May she rest in
Mm.
peace. She passed away in 2002. But she went with me on various trips
Oh, wow.
around the planet. We did Vietnam, we did Cambodia at a time when there were no tourists there because it was terrorist threat. People were being abducted. Back in the end of the 80s, 88, we did a trip there to
Hmm.
Cambodia. We had basically Angkor Wat for ourselves. There were like 5 tourists in all of Siem Reap, you know. So, and we
Uh,
did a trip to Cuba. We did a trip to Myanmar, Thailand. We did many trips together. She became my travel companion,
wow.
my
So,
grandmother.
but yeah, but you said you moved here more permanently in 1982, right?
82 was the time when I started living in Ubud. And I
Yeah.
came straight to Ubud to live here. Kuta Lekian, I remember it took me a couple of weeks before I went down there. The reason I went down there was because I had my poste restante, where people were sending me letters to. That was down at the Kuta post office.
Oh,
That was the
oh,
reason I would go down to Kuta the first time, because people to pick up mail, and lucky enough there were 2 letters. I remember that was my first trip down there. Yeah.
ah, ah. So when you moved here in 82, what was it like?
Ubud was a very small village, and it had a couple of homestays, and that was it. There were no hotels here. There was no more than homestays. Homestays meant that you would literally stay at a family's home and rent a room. And my first homestay experience was at a road in the center of Ubud. Now the center of Ubud, it's called Jalan Gautama. And there was a place called Newman, and that's still there as a homestay, by the way. And that's
Hmm.
where I stayed, and it was $2 a night and breakfast included. And you had your own little room. The electricity usually went out around 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very laid back. The beautiful thing about Ubud in those days was that we had a lot of trees.
Mm.
That's the thing I remember most of Ubud. And Monkey Forest Road was our rice fields. There was no soccer field when I first came here.
Oh,
There was
oh.
no soccer field. The soccer field was put in later because I also stayed, after I stayed at Newman's homestay, I stayed a while right at a place called Bandy's, and Bandy passed away. He had 2 little rooms overlooking the rice fields, and he was right next to where the soccer field is in Ubud.
Oh,
And from
yeah.
there until all the way down to Monkey Forest itself, which was not advertised as Monkey Forest, really. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't capitalized as that at all. They haven't discovered the potential yet. There was a little, not asphalt road, but it was a stone road, like made out of, very rough stone road. And
Mm-hmm.
you could only pass with one single car. And there was only
Mm-hmm.
one place besides the rice fields, and that was called the Ubud Inn.
Mm.
And then there was nothing. And in the back of the Ubud Inn, there was a friend of me staying. He was an Indian guy from Singapore, together with a lady called Samantha. Samantha passed away like 4 months or 5 months ago. And Samantha Black from New York. They stayed there in the back of Ubud Inn below. And that's where we always would go and play music at night with oil lamps. Okay? Mm-hmm. They had a kerosene, then finally they upgraded the oil lamps to a kerosene lamp, and which you had to pump in all the time. You know, every 10 minutes you had to pump in the kerosene, and that was a lot more light. And we would have music sessions there, you know, until sunrise, you know, every day. Yeah. It was very beautiful back then. It was just, and everybody knew each other. So whenever I meet people who tell me they have been living here since the 80s, I'd look at them and either say, yes, I remember you've been here, or I would say no, because we knew everybody. You know, there was only a handful of Westerners living in Ubud. You know, there was Hans Snell, the painter.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There was Ari Smith, who then moved up who was a very good friend of my grandmother's. He and my grandmother became very good friends. But he moved up to Singaraja. And there was Linda Garland, who married Amir, who was living a little bit above my first house in Champuan. Well, in Sangingan, it's called Sangingan now. They were here. That was about it. Okay.
Wow.
Well, sorry, there was Victor Mason also, who then later had the Beggar's Bush. But when I first came, it was before the Beggar's Bush. Oh, sorry, there was Mooney and her husband. Mooney's husband was an American guy, I can't remember. And they had the first Western food restaurant down at the bridge. That was also happening. And later on, there was Ella, who married Rio Helmi, and they had a child together. And they opened up the Lotus. That was the second Western food place.
Oh, wow.
That opened up a couple of years after Mooney's. But Mooney's was the first one actually serving brownies and hamburgers and, doing the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Yeah. It was there. Mooney's was there in 92 when I was here. And the soccer field was there in 92.
Yeah, that was there already by then. But it was not there in 82. It was not there. It was all rice fields, trust me. It was completely rice fields. There were a couple of settlements until just before the soccer field, and that was it. That was the village of Ubud.
No, it was more developed than what you are describing. Wow, yeah. But much, much, much less than these days. I was shocked when I came back in 2013. So what about the dances, the kachak, the lagong? Was there anything like that? It was happening around.
Well, when I came here, the Ubud Palace already had performances, but it wasn't a daily thing. I remember it was twice a week. But there were temple ceremonies all the time, so there was no reason to really go and buy a ticket for the performance in front of the palace. There was simply no reason to do that, you know. And the temple ceremonies were very elaborate, and we would, you know, we would all know where the next temple ceremony was, because we were all smoking cigarettes back then. So that was basically the only place where you could buy a pack of cigarettes past 8 o'clock. You know, so we would all end up going there and, you know, buying things there and having food there. And we would always know where the ceremony was, because it was part of getting supplies past a certain bedtime. Okay, because everything else was closed by then. Ubud was closing down at 8 o'clock. And some of the places which later opened up, like some of the eateries, they managed to stay open until 9 maybe, but basically
Hmm.
Ubud was closed down by 9, by 8. That was
Well,
Last Chance Club. Yeah.
was the Kachak and the Lagong and those, were they different back then?
The Kitchak I don't remember as an Ubud feature. I remember the Kitchak you had to go to a place next to Bona back then to see
Hmm.
the Kitchak at all. That's what I remember.
Yeah, 92, I had to go out of town
It
to see
wasn't in
it.
Ubud. You couldn't see the
No,
Kitchak in Ubud. You had to
no,
go
it
out of
wasn't.
town.
And
And
it was outdoors.
and it was outdoors and it was close to Bona. There was one place close to Bona and it was only once a week. And
Mm.
they were special performances and they were shipping people up from back Sanur because that was just before Nusa Dua opened up. And later they would ship them up from Nusa Dua. But then they invented it and brought everything down there right in front of the hotels down in Nusa Dua. So it all worked out that they didn't even have to ship the tourists up here. They shipped the Balinese down there to perform and then brought them back. And I remember when the first Balinese started performing in Nusa Dua, they brought them in trucks, the whole
Ah,
village, for the Kechak. They brought them in
ah,
trucks, just filled up a truck and everybody's standing in the truck and the whole village would go down there. Yeah.
mm,
Okay.
mm,
And then
ah.
drive back to the village the same night, right after the performance. Yeah, that's how it was.
It, so, what do you think about Balinese, both the Hinduism and then the animism with all the offerings? And
That's a very deep question, and that would take quite a while to explain. I think it's very photogenic for tourism, and it has brought tourism here, and it has definitely hypnotized people over the
hmm.
years as a photogenic feature. Now, the Balinese themselves, in my beliefs, are you know they believe into not only the ancestors, they also believe into the ghosts of their ancestors.
Hmm.
Okay, and so they're actually for them it's like a protection to satisfy them, and they also they the offerings are basically done so that bad spirits pass on. Okay,
Hmm.
and only good spirits stay. That is the idea. That's also why
Hmm.
we have the Nippy Day, which is basically the high point, the orgasm of doing this worship. Okay. Now,
Hmm.
this to that. Now, I basically have never really believed in religious ceremonies too much because I've always tried to create my own individual experience.
Hmm.
And but I've always admired the Balinese for their endurance and for their hard work in preparing the ceremonies.
Oh
And
yeah.
and what's happening right now to Ubud, that you can have an instant ceremony by going to certain yoga outlets. I don't want to name them because I don't want to discredit them.
Hmm.
That you can have an instant 1 hour ceremony at whatever, with including holy water and getting blessed. Uh,
Hmm.
it's actually, getting blessed is basically, the fruit, the dessert of the meal. After you have been, planting the seeds, after you've been growing the vegetables, after you've been harvesting them, after you've been cleaning them, preparing them, and then finally in the end, which now in this perspective would be, each Balinese village basically has 3 temples. Not all the temples are being cultivated for a ceremony all the time, but the Balinese do go into the temples and clean them up. Okay, so
Hmm.
well, first they built the temple, which is putting the seed, right? Then they clean them up, which is getting the vegetables out of the ground. Then they decorate them, which is, cutting them up and making them into food,
Yeah.
and so on and so on until the ceremony comes and they actually dress up in their best outfit and smell good with a shower and perfume and go into the temple like superstars. David Bowie called the Balinese the best dressed people on the planet, and I understand why, especially when they go into the temple, and then they get blessed. Okay, but
Yeah.
that's a very, very hard work until they get blessed. This is a lot of effort in it. Okay, it's not an instant, pay me whatever sum and get blessed. Okay, it's days and days and days of work. Besides that, the Balinese on a daily basis do the offerings, and they are aware of demons, and they actually worship the demons. In my opinion, Balinese worship demons by giving offerings to them. Balinese are demon worshippers. That is my personal opinion. But me personally, I always loved watching it. I loved going to the temple, getting blessed. But in all the years I've been here, I've never directly been part of a banchar. And I know very few Westerners who actually have. I've been indirectly a part of the banchar by supporting the banchar on a monthly basis. But the direct part of being in the banchar is like a second job. And I've never really been into that position, and I've never been doing that. Also because I'm not Hinduist. I'm not an Hinduist. I'm Protestant, And but I've always loved going to the temple after everything's been already decorated. I would always drop some money there as a donation to the temple after praying, because it helps the Balinese so they can redecorate it again, and I've always loved the Balinese for doing that.
Wow, that's really well said. Well, what do you have any other observations about their culture and the Balinese people?
Okay, let's talk about Balinese culture right now.
Yeah.
Now that the tourists aren't here in the time of pandemic, things have shifted slightly. Things have shifted slightly that maybe to a point where it's more visible what the Balinese are doing, because we are not getting distracted, especially at Ubud, at places like Ubud, which are tourist places, or Sanur, because basically there aren't as many tourists around, so we don't get distracted by the tourist activities.
Yeah.
So we can see more clearly who is around. Well, it's the Balinese. Well, there's a huge community now also of Indonesians coming from other islands who work here.
Yes.
And so it's not always easy for short time visitors to recognize who comes from where. But you can see right away on small little things. And also if you know the faces of people, you can see immediately by their eating habits, for instance, where they come from. So right now in the pandemic time, even though the Balinese aren't allowed to have the big temple ceremonies as they used to have before, because they simply aren't allowed to gather in big groups. Right now, we can see that the Balinese culture has been very intact. And it's also been intact for the tourists who are here. It was just not as visible because there were other things to watch with the tourists, because it was so flooded with tourists, basically. And what's happening right now is not something I would ever post on Facebook because I wouldn't upset somebody. I think I managed that to you at Umba the other day. But what's happening right now is that not only Bali, also places like Barcelona and Venice and whatever other place which has been run over by mass tourism,
Yeah.
that they can breathe again, and that they can recover again, and that they are not being worn out by those masses of people who most of them don't even have an interest except an Instagram photo they take to show that they've been there,
Yeah.
to make a little cross. They're not really interested in the place itself. It's just like, well, it's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
Okay, so not having that around actually gives us more of a focus of what the Balinese have been doing. And the Balinese have been doing that while the tourists were here just as well. But I also have to say the ceremonies now are smaller. They are less show-off simply because there's less money around. The tourism did bring a lot of extra cash, which then have been what I call ceremony converted into competitive ceremony style settings, where people would try to outdo their neighbor in even more lavish decorated and more and better food and better car and better everything, and the money has definitely not helped the essence of it. It has helped the more lavish spending aspect of it, I would say. Okay, and right now that is not present because the money isn't around. It's as simple as that. And it brings also the Balinese back down to a smaller group setting while they do their ceremonies, and it brings them back down to a more essential, more to the essence of things. That's what I think is happening at the moment. Besides that, I see the youngsters, in early morning being on bicycles, running again, early evening being on bicycles, running again, planting things on little plots. Gardening is the hippest place right now. And the hippest thing right now, every place is turned into a little garden with flowers and fruits and, cooking. And, it's a little bit back to basics again. It's very, very good for Bali. I really believe that this is saving the island, and I would wish it wouldn't stop, but it will. And we should enjoy the moment of Bali breathing again.
Yeah. Wow, that's well said. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not an eloquent speaker. It's a lot of
No,
words.
that was very eloquent. I disagree with you.
I have a lot of things in my head, but I'm also speaking from my own little experience, and I have never been really a person who would study those things in a way of going to some university outlet here and learning all the phrases and all the Sanskrit names and all the proper, things to really, articulate it into a really expert way of detailing it. So for me, it was always more of well, I'm here, let's watch it. And wow, over there, look at this. There's a temple ceremony. Let's try over there. Oh shit, I don't have a sarong. Where can I get a sarong? Okay, if I can find a sarong, I'll sit down with them. Because it was always a thing of, you got to have a sarong when you go to a ceremony. You can't just walk in there with your flip-flops on. It should, and your shorts and your dirty trousers. It just doesn't work like that.
No.
But if I was always interested of, hey, what are the guys doing over there? What's the gambling? Wow, I want to go over there immediately. So it wasn't only ceremony. It was like, what are they doing? I'm always interested, and that interest hasn't stopped. And there are so many things I'm still discovering. Actually, I must say the more I learn about, the more I feel I have no idea of what's going on around me. I'm
Hmm.
much more confused now than I was at the beginning of me coming here.
Good for you. Good for you.
But I'm
Uh,
still curious to learn about all the things, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, wow. I think that's all very well said. Uh, do you have anything else to add? I'm.
Are we on live right now? Are actually people listening to this, or is this
No, no,
pre-recorded?
no,
And
no, no. I plan to post this on Thursday.
okay, so
Uh,
will you recut it again, or you just leave it raw?
Mainly, but I'll go over it, but there's no need to, I don't spend a lot of time on it. You didn't say it. You haven't said anything that needs to be eliminated. I noticed that if that happens. Uh,
I'm very
but
careful with that, sir. There's
yeah,
one
yeah,
reason that one of my dear friends right now, his name is Rings from a group called Superman is Dead. He
yeah.
well, they called it hate speech. Uh, I'm not that sure. I don't want to judge what it was, but he just got a year and 2 months in jail. And
Really?
he was not only a big activist in with the Tolak Benor movement, where they tried to stop Benor being
Yeah,
developed.
yeah, yeah,
He was
yeah.
one of the really big ones, one of the main speakers, because he was from a punk rock band called Superman is Dead, and
Oh, yeah,
they're
right.
really famous. But he
Yeah.
was also now he became outspoken about the pandemic, and he they say that he insulted the the medical the medical association here in Indonesia by
Mm-hmm.
being outspoken and by pushing for demonstrations where people would go without masks. And
Oh, I didn't know there was anything like that here.
anyway, and he got put away for a year and 2 months. He just got the verdict last week, and we are very upset because I know the guy personally, and I don't think he deserves it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, especially because when he recognized that he overstepped his boundaries, him believing that this is a free country
Ha.
with freedom of speech, he actually excused himself. But anyway, let me not judge about the verdict. I'm just saying this is why I'm extremely careful of what I post, because things you post can be used as evidence against you in
Oh, yeah.
Indonesia.
That's right.
And Facebook and Instagram are very closely being watched.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm very, very careful, but also it doesn't make sense to insult people. We have to find solutions.
Yeah.
It's so easy to to trash things, and I think it's much more valuable if we come up with solutions and ways of improving things to the better. Because there's always some point which you believe is negative, and there's always some point which you believe is positive. To
Yeah.
whatever thing, there are always two facets to it.
Yeah.
Because that's the dualism we human beings usually refer to as something we recognize. Of course, there's a world beyond it where those things don't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But the dualism is where we are at as human beings, doing our daily little life.
Yeah.
And we can pick. We can be not positive and try to find solutions, or we could be negative and try to find solutions, which also is acceptable. Or we could be just all negative and not try to find solutions, which I think is an absolute no way to go.
Yeah.
Okay, because the idea is that nothing's perfect, and that's the beauty of it.
Mm. Mm. Um, wow, that's well said. That's well said. Hmm.
So much to freedom of speech in Indonesia.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. That's
I love Indonesians dearly, and I have found out over the years that there it's all up to us how we communicate, and not just
Yeah.
here in Indonesia. In America, it's the same thing. We
Yeah.
can pick the medium. We can pick the energy. We can pick the vibes. In the end, it all comes down to vibes, the vibrations. We
Yeah.
give each other vibrations. The words we say have no value. It's the vibration. It's the
Yeah.
energy. The
Ah.
words create, or we create while we are next to a person. That's why talking to somebody and being next to them where aura and aura meet is still the most precious moment we can basically have to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that will not go away. I would also advise you, please, well, advise you without having to advise you. I didn't mean it like that. I should say recommend you. That was wrong said. I would
That's
also
okay.
I would also recommend to you Lawrence Blair, who I think is much more eloquent than me, as he is a doctor. The guy who did The Ring of Fire back,
Oh, yeah.
and he is speaking about us human beings being creatures. And he has a very, very big thing about the pandemic also, and to refer to him. And if you can get a chance, call him up and see if you can get an interview with Lawrence, because he is just unbelievable. And he's really, he not only is he a doctor and in real native English speaking, he is also connected with people like Buckminster Fuller, and you know, the
Yeah.
rest in peace Buckminster Fuller, and the esoteric top masters who really push things on a worldwide movement basis and
Yeah.
awareness revolution, you know.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
had a lot of those people come through Ubud. Buckminster Fuller, the place where Simon lived, here in Ubud, in Champuan, which was my second house I built. We had there in the back at the theater, that was where Buckminster Fuller built a Jurassic Dome, and
Oh.
out of bamboo, which was tied together with strips of whatever it was. I can't remember. Lontar. I think it was Lontar. And it was we had Attenborough, the Attenborough guy here. We had nearly everybody come through Bali in the 80s. You know, at a time when Ubud was still a small village, but it attracted unbelievably creative people because they could simply, bathe themselves in the beauty of Balinese lifestyle and without being recognized.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm. Mm.
And that lasted until the end of the 80s, beginning 90s, but by 92 it was over. Then you could see those people only at private dinner parties, and then they stopped coming.
Yeah.
Or if they did come, they would go on to some little remote island, and just or hide away in some remote villa around Ubud, and you would not see them at all anymore. But anyway, I'm not talking about the Hollywood crowd because that never really interested me that much. I'm more talking about people who were doers, people who were talking about getting your act together to become more self-sufficient, to create more sustainable architecture, more livable, more human living spaces. People who were actually hands-on, trying to show us how we could improve our life with doing little things, And we had nearly any of those top names come through here out of the esoteric world. And okay, to get back to the Balinese dance thing, that was created by Walter Spies, the Ketchak. The Ketchak dance was not created by the Balinese. Walter Spies was a German-Russian dancer painter who lived here in Champuan, where the Champuan Hotel is now. Who lived in one of the houses from the Chakota of Sukawati from Chokputra's father. You know,
Oh,
he created an art community there, and he brought Walter Spies in and gave Walter Spies a place to live, right next to the Champon River, where the Champon Hotel is now, and that's where the Walter Spies house is still, at the Champon Hotel.
hmm.
And Walter Spies was the one. He was also a piano player before he came to Bali. He worked in Bandung, playing the piano to the silent movies.
Oh, wow.
And then he came over here. He was a musician, painter, and created the Kachak dance with the Balinese as a tourist attraction to present it to his friends. And some of them were A-crowd people who came on the cruise liners from Singapore down here back then in the 1920s, 1930s. And, you know, people like Charlie Chaplin were in there, and so on and so on. I'm, you know, Greta Gardner and whatever. I'm not sure, you know.
Yeah.
You know, who all they were, who they were all. But you can read that up. Okay, there are books on that. There are Walter Spies biographies now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was actually basically how Ubud was being put on the map as a place for the creative arts. You know, the meaning of Ubud? Ubud is herbs. It's the herbal plants.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
That's Ubud. Ubud is, in Balinese, is it's the herbal plants. Okay.
Oh. Huh.
And that's why people came up here to Ubud to collect. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, man. Am I
Hey,
through? Are you satisfied with everything?
oh, yeah, that was fascinating. Indeed. And look, we're gonna come visit you maybe in January or something like that.
You can come anytime. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
We might be there, but I mean, you're only half an hour, 40 minutes away.
It's not a big deal. I nearly
Yeah.
thought about coming down there last night because they at the room, you know, the Rumah Sanur?
Yeah, sure.
Rumah Sanur has they started just under the tree again.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But then it started raining so heavy that I didn't feel, and I didn't have a car last night, only had the
Yeah.
motorbike.
Yeah, that's
So
just walking distance from where we live.
yeah.
Uh,
That
I'd
whole
wa-
area, by the way, was a red light district, and they transformed that beautifully now into a more livable area.
yeah, well, there's still a little bit of that around. Uh, and but yeah, that's a kapok tree. I guess they call it kapak. Uh,
Yeah, it's a
you
very beautiful tree.
you know the how it snows the white kapok. I don't know what to call it. That's used to make cushions
To make
with.
cushions, of course. No,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's a kapok tree, but anyway,
Well,
because
that's what they say. That's what they say there.
kapok trees are really tall. They shoot up, and then on the top they have the kapok. That's how kapok trees are, and we find very few of them because you know, there used to be so many of them. There were two types of trees which really kind of disappeared in Bali. One is the kapok tree, and the other one is the lychee tree.
Oh, really?
The lychee trees were everywhere, and they completely kind of disappeared. You can still see a couple of them. They were brought down here by the Chinese
Oh.
and planted all over the island, and you can see them on the way up to Batur. You can
Mm-hmm.
still see a couple of them, but they used to line the roads everywhere, and they are slowly disappearing now.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're
Hmm.
becoming less and less because the lychee tree wood, it's actually not that good, but people use it for carvings.
Oh. Oh. Wow.
But
Wow.
another thing about Ubud, where they have the Puri Lukisan right now,
Mm-hmm.
there's a big parking lot there. Right there was a beautiful big banyan tree, and I was so surprised that they would cut that down. But
Oh.
it was huge because the banyan trees are holy trees here in
Yeah.
Bali. But it was huge, and there was a river, where there's the parking lot now. They just cemented in the whole river. But there was
Oh,
a river right there, a
oh
small
my
little
gosh.
river gorge, okay?
Huh.
And you can still see it if you go a little bit either direction to the side, that there actually still is a river there.
Oh.
A little thing, but it nearly disappeared. But like I said, there were hardly any shops. There were only shops at where the market is now. There were two shops where you could buy a couple of things, and once in a while they had a Newsweek there and a Time magazine in the
Mm.
80s. Once in a while, and usually the Time magazine was already 3 weeks old. So we wouldn't buy them, and but we'd go once in a while, we'd go down to Kuta, to the Galileo, the first supermarket Galileo in Kuta opened up. It was something around 84 or something, or 85.
Mm-hmm.
And we would actually go there to buy butter, and once in a while they had cheese there. They had very few things, but a couple of Western products, and we'd go there. Before that, we always had to go to Chalankachamada to get it from the Chinese traders,
Mm.
to buy
Mm.
butter there.
Mm. Wow.
But some of the things were very scarce back then. There was no bank in Ubud. All our banking was done down in Denpasar. To go to Kuta, none of us really had a motorbike. None of us had a car. To go to Kuta, it meant three BMOs, okay?
Oh, wow.
And so it was quite time consuming. If you would go down to Kuta, you would usually stay overnight and then come back the next day. Unless you'd go very early in the morning and then be back by the time it would be sunset in
And
the bush.
now, how long does it take you to get there? 45 minutes?
Well, on the motorbike, yeah, about 45 minutes from here to Kuta. That could be right.
Uh-huh.
Especially now in the pandemic, because it's less traffic.
Well, yeah, I mean without traffic. Yeah.
Without
Huh.
traffic, you can make it to Kuta in half an hour.
Oh,
I,
really?
I guarantee you. I've
Yeah.
done it many times without any problem, without pushing
Uh-huh.
it. Half an hour, you can make it. Half an hour,
You,
35 minutes.
did you get here in Sonora in half an hour?
Easy, less. 20,
Haha.
20, 25 minutes without pushing it, without traffic.
Wow. That's great.
But that would be nighttime. That would be past 10 o'clock.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
That would be past 10 o'clock, and but without pushing it, without going like as fast as you can. And I remember going down to Legian, we did that in half an hour too, on the motorbike
Mm-hmm.
in the older days. But that's impossible now, because even at nighttime now we have traffic. It's just not as easy anymore. Even at nighttime you have cars
You have trucks too. Yeah.
and trucks and things to watch out.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's really nice not having so much traffic. That's
The,
really great.
the traffic thing has changed a lot of things, and it started when the Indonesians opened up to a credit system, which was back then pushed by private TV channels. In the first years I came here, we had two TV channels. We had the TVRI, which was the Indonesian channel, which had once in a while an English movie with Indonesian subtitles, of course censored. And we had the Bali TV.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, around 88, 89, all of a sudden those private channels appeared out of nowhere. And it was, like Indosiar and blah, blah, blah. I can't remember all the names. Metro TV, And they were actually preparing people for buying things on credit. Before that, in order to have a motorbike, you had to pay the motorbike in one go cash. There was no
Mm.
credit system. There was no other way around. And nobody
Mm.
had that amount of money. But by enabling people to pay off the motorbike on a credit basis, all of a sudden, even even the most economically depressed peasant was able to afford a motorbike.
Yeah.
And that changed the whole ball game. And from the motorbike, people moved up to the car. Now you can get a car simply by giving a deposit of 25 million. You can get a brand new car out of the showroom. And then, you might not pay off the car, but you just pay what they call chichilan. Chichilan is the sum of credit, so you can continuously have the credit.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And that's why everybody was a little shocked with the pandemic that tourists wouldn't be around anymore who would give them that extra cash to pay up for their cars, because everything is on credit here now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was impossible before the credit system started. And that was around 88 or something. Yeah. That's when the credit system officially started. And the Chinese, together with the banks, figured that out. And it became very successful. Now some of my employees even credit a pair of flip-flops, which sets them back 60,000 rupiah. And they pay it off in 3 times. I'm not kidding. Okay.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's amazing.
So the economic system has definitely changed here.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's for the better, but I remember when I was in Cuba, one of the things I loved about Cuba so much was that people were poor. And because when they are poor, then and everybody's poor around you, then there's a lot less jealousy,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And people are friendly usually when they're poor.
Yeah.
And giving too.
Yeah.
The poorer they are, the more giving they are, the more they watch out for each other.
The more money people have, the more they're stressed.
That's right. And often people don't have the money. They just act like they do. And that's why we get back to the credit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Are we good?
Thanks a lot. That was great. That was great.
Om Swastiastu.
Yeah, Om Swastiastu. And I'll be in touch with you. I'll let you know when I put this up.
Yeah, maybe if you cut it down into a little thing, then send it over to me.
I won't cut it down. I won't cut it down. I put up very long ones. I want to get a picture of you, but I think I just take it off Facebook.
Take it off my Facebook. You're connected. You can pick any photo you want.
Yeah. Okay.
All
right.
Just take the one where I look like a monster.
Okay. Very good. We'll do that. All
okay.
Right. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Take care.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Well, thank you very much, Raymond Rausch. That was great. Very interesting. And I look forward to the next time we meet, maybe up in Ubud. Yeah, we should get up there because when there's a lot of tourists here, Ubud is just very crowded. I still like it, There's a lot happening there. But it's interesting, how he says nowadays it's like what it was when he first came here. Except it's got a zillion buildings right next to each other. Well, okay. So, until next time. This is DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur. with Doggett, Pandita, Feline, Kuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.